I'm Aidan Wright. I'm the director of the Coalition for Ethical Journalism, which is the global ethics program of the Gen. And I'm not going to pitch to you something that's new and innovative, that's high-tech, but actually something that's really rather old-fashioned, but absolutely at the heart of everything we do. And that is the question of how we guarantee the quality and the standard of the content, the journalistic content that we provide, no matter what the platform and no matter what screen we see it on. And the purpose of this panel discussion is really to focus on an aspect of that work. And I'd like to ask my panelists to come up and take their seats. Meanwhile, I want to give you just a little bit of quick background about the Coalition for Ethical Journalism. The Coalition is dealing, it's an informal grouping of bringing together professional groups, owners, editors, journalists, filmmakers across all media platforms to work together to seek to rekindle the notion of ethical values and standards and good moral conduct in media, no matter what platform we're working on. And it's focused on three main aspects of this challenging task. The first is the question of how we maintain respect for responsible journalism at the bottom of the media pyramid, how we make sure our reporters are working according to a sort of a framework of values and how they're delivering good quality and reliable content. Secondly, the Coalition is looking at the need for engagement in this important area from the owners and the people who are managing the industry. So you might call it focus on the top of the media pyramid. There is no question at all in my mind that you cannot get delivery of high quality, good journalism at the bottom of the media pyramid unless you've got buy-in and commitment to the values of journalism from owners in the whole of the media sector. And the third element of our campaign, which is important, is the question of how do we redefine the architecture for regulation of media in this new environment. And we live, as always, with the constant problem of balancing the value of self-regulation and the importance of self-regulation against the wish and the impulse of governments to interfere themselves in seeking to control the quality of information. So we're very much in favor of forms of self-regulation, but we're really ready to promote and wanting to promote a debate about how in the new information environment that question of self-regulation can actually deliver good quality journalism. The theme of the discussion today is to take account of the fact that we live in a world in which information comes at a breakneck pace. No matter how we deliver it, it's arriving in our newsrooms rapidly and quickly, and very often there isn't enough time to properly reflect on where the information comes from, how to verify its contact, are the images correct, are they from the right place, and so on. And the competitive pressure to get material published is such that very often corners are being cut in terms of maintenance of standards and so on. So there's a question there for us about how do we maintain standards of ethical, good quality journalism when we live in the gale force wind of technological change and information coming from all sides. It's a massive and important task that we need to address. To answer that question, in parts, I've got a fine body of people here, and I want to introduce them very briefly. I've got Ying from Hong Kong. Ying is absolutely, I think, one of the sort of leading thinkers and leaders of the debate about the future of journalism and how journalism needs to sort of secure its future in parts of the world where there are massive problems of corruption, political influence, that causes real problems, but also massive problems of social dislocation and poverty. And then we've got Dean Wright, who is here representing Connell Wright, who's actually working as a consultant, but actually his claim to fame is a pretty great one, actually. He's very distinguished. He's the former standards editor of Reuters, and there's actually nothing that you can tell this man about ethical journalism and its importance and so on. And so I'm going to be having, we're going to try and feed off his views later on. And then we've got Bob Satchwell from the United Kingdom. He's the director of the Society of Editors. Bob's a distinguished journalist and got a long history of defending the principles of self-regulation and so on. And he's got a bit of a problem at the moment, which is called the Leveson Inquiry, News International, Rupert Murdoch, various problems arising from that, where he's you know, among a community which is actually facing a very tough question, which is how do you guarantee self-regulation for the future? So we're going to be hearing from them in a few moments, but first actually, one of the most important aspects of the question about how you deal with the quality of news when it comes at you at a rapid pace, it's how that's accentuated when the big story breaks. And we're going to start with a film and a presentation by Niklas Lysvag from TV. He's the news editor from TV2 in Norway. Now, you know about Norway. It's got a special place in our heart, I have to say. Norway's a small country, but it punches well above its weight. In journalism, as in actually most other areas. It's the home of the Nobel Peace Prize. It's one of the world's leading countries giving money, donor funds to support the development of media around the world. And I'm very pleased to say, and happy to say, that it's actually the main supporter at the moment of the Coalition for Ethical Journalism. But last year, in July the 22nd, Norway was shocked into a completely new reality about how it sees itself and how it sees itself internally with the terrible events of July the 22nd, a bomb in the center of Oslo, and a madman, although apparently that is subject to legal decision yet, who then carried out a massacre of mainly young people on a nearby island. This was an extraordinary event. It came in midsummer. Most of the major, or many of the major people in charge of newsrooms and so on were actually taking their holiday break. There were many interns around the place, and suddenly TV2, like every part of the media spectrum in Norway, was faced with the challenge of how to cover this story. It raised a whole number of important ethical issues and principles and problems, and I'd like Niklas to start us off this afternoon by giving you access to information which has not yet been published, but actually a film which was produced internally by TV2 to assess how they performed during this moment of crisis. Niklas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Aidan. Can you hear me? Everyone? Yeah. As he said, I'm Niklas Lysvag. I'm the news editor of TV2 in Norway. We are the biggest commercial broadcaster in Norway. We have an array of different TV channels, amongst them the main channel, TV2, and a 24/7 news channel, and of course an online operation. I am going to show you some video, but just to get this into perspective and context, I need to get you on board on a few facts about Norway. 5 million people is not a lot. That's how many people live in Norway. Very stable country, very open society. Still is, but it's not as open as it used to be. Open in the way that I can call ministers and I have their phone numbers. Utøya, which is the island where every summer the Labour youth have their political camp, is a political institution in Norway. This year, the foreign minister was there on the 20th. Last year, the foreign minister was there on the 21st. Former Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland was there earlier on the 22nd, and the Prime Minister was due the day after. And it's extensively covered every summer in the news media in Norway. So, on 3:25 p.m., the bomb goes off, ripping through the government buildings in Oslo. 950 kilograms of fertilizer bomb. 8 people were killed. Could have been much more, but this is in the middle of the holidays and it's a Friday afternoon. This mass murderer then walks over to his car and drives out to Utøya, where he gets onto the island at 5:10 p.m. And for 1 hour and 25 minutes, he massacres 69 people, most of them teenagers. Many of them shot many times, up to 8 times. Needless to say, this happens so fast, and there's such a wide array of ethical dilemmas and questions raised, and I'm going to go into those a bit further on. I would like, though, to show this film that we made. We made a documentary for in-house use only. Basically, it's interviewing our people and what they did and what they thought and the dilemmas they ran into on that night of the 22nd. And please, we don't feel that we are the victims here at all. It was challenging, but we're not the victims at all. So this is not the whole film. This is just excerpts from it, around 10-minute video. I think it's quite good, and we use this to learn from. It's a very important piece of well, anyway, that we use to get on. So you can play the first film. Thank you.
Så går det helt fram til sånn at jeg ser inn i resepsjonen på Høyblokka. Da ser jeg bare tvers gjennom til legehuset. Så ser jeg på kantina, og der jo ingenting igjen. Alt borte. Det bare blåst ut. Og så ser jeg mørke skader bare helt uvirkelig.
Det første jeg sa var litt menneskeskap her. Det lå jo folk her liksom hele tiden var rett av blod. Og jeg tenkte som jeg skulle skrive at det var en gang som hadde en pinne som kom ut av hodet. Hvor det var her rett seg på folk her.
På resten. sin tid på Utøya hjelpesakos vet om hvor det var. Og jeg reiser meg, og så roper jeg over vet om hvor det var til Utøya. Og jeg spør, så legger jeg den på. Og da finner jeg selv flere.
Det tyngste på Solhjørna var å se året komme i livene sine. Se på telefonen sin hele tiden, det var ringe. De snakket med hverandre, og så på ting for seg selv, og så plutselig smilte noe, som da hadde fått Lysvag. Og det var vondt da, for vi så alt på avstand, det var ikke et stort for å gå ut for.
Og vi visste jo veldig tydelig tidspunkt at det var veldig mange drept Utøya. Tallet vi hadde hørt tidligere var minst 50. Og når det da kommer foreldre som forteller at de har nettopp snakket med datteren sin på telefon som bryter den igjen, og de har ingen informasjon eller foreldre som kommer og forteller barnet som samlet, og de vet ikke hva som skjer, og så sitter de med den informasjonen og vet at det er minst 50 drept Utøya. Det kan ikke du si til den noen far som står der og fortsatt har tro for barna sine på lag. Utfordringen der det var jo en enormt behov for informasjon. Og samtidig så måtte vi rulle litt tilbake. Vi visste jo mye mer enn det vi egentlig rapporterte den dagen. Og jeg tror vi fikk til den balansen på en god måte. Hvordan hun og Tina hadde gjort seg bak en stein med hennes barn, og andre steder vi hadde lukket de ut derfra. En av de hovedhuset først, hvor vi begynte å høre skyting, og da røk alle prøvemotiven etter at man kjøpte dem som kunne flytte oss. Og da ble flere som skutt og tanket på veggene. Så løp folk vekk ned mot vannet, og det gikk også med klipper, og de satt langs hele øya ut, og han gikk sakte med sitt i ut og kjørt alle sammen. Og etter hvert så kom han til der jeg satt, og jeg gikk med rolig og kjørt til personen som satt rett siden av meg, og da styrte jeg litt i vannet, og da kjørte jeg med han til vann, og når jeg siden av så sto han bare og så på meg, og prøvde å skyte igjen.
Da sitter vi i en sånn følelse hvor det har snett en bombe i regjeringskvartalet. Du aner ikke helt hva det er for noe. Kan det er som angriper Norge eller Oslo, og så er det skyting på Utøya som skinner i alvorlig. Da fikk jeg en sånn følelse som jeg ikke har kjent siden jeg var liten unge og redd for atomkrig. Det var sånn, hva gjør det som skjer i landet vårt? Så det var
kula gikk inn på den siden her, og kom ut på andre siden.
Det var helt usikker. Men når jeg sitter i det intervjuet og hører på han fortelle sin sinnssyke historie, så rolig, så velartikulert, så stødig, mens jeg sitter liksom og kjemper med mine
fortalte de dramatiske historiene om hvordan de redda ungdom, hvordan de gikk ut. Han skulle være en som gjorde veldig inntrykk. Han kom bort og begynte å gråte, så sa han: jeg var ikke modig nok. Jeg var ikke modig nok til å gå ut og hjelpe. Jeg ble redd. Han satte seg på den og begynte å gråte, og han ble skikkelig voldsom. Ved de dagene ble det
Well, obviously the ethical choices and dilemmas came at us at a furious pace those hours. I'm going to take you through a few choices that we made and why we made them. A very important one is that the day after, on the 23rd, when everybody knew about this extreme situation that had appeared, the numbers of the dead, the youths, we actually went out of character. We opted to, okay, we're going to go with the people now. So for several days we reported on the march of 250,000 people with roses, 77 funerals, and we left the investigative, the government critical, that kind of journalism out for a few days, deliberately. We knew, of course, that the story how Norway failed its most important task to actually provide security and safety for the people, and especially these young people, it wouldn't go away. So later we've had hundreds of stories on how and why that happened, of course. But we did go out of character. We did, it was a heart thing, not a brain thing, for several days there. And I think most other Norwegian news media did the same. Also, we had to put in place extreme measures in our approach and dialogue and interviewing the survivors and the families of the youths that were killed and all these victims. We have not had one complaint from anyone who has had interviews aired on TV2, so we must have done something right here. But this goes along the lines of respect, dignity, caution, of course. This is not new, but we have never done this on this scale before, and we still do it because the trial is still going on. We still meet these people in the courthouse in Oslo every day. As you heard, one of the reporters said, accuracy. We knew more than we could broadcast, and of course more than we could tell these parents that were looking for their kids. And in a normal situation, we had good enough sources, many enough sources to, at least at 9 p.m, tell our viewers that there are at least 50 dead at Utøya. But we waited. We had these sources from the police, from the medical workers, hospitals. We knew that the figure was big. We had sources saying 60 to 80, 70, almost 100, 50, between 50 and 100. We could have gone out and said at least 50. We didn't. We waited for the authorities. And so actually most of Norway didn't know the extent of this until 4 o'clock in the morning, when the National Chief of Police told us that there were at least 80 dead, which was also wrong. It was 69. Also, let's face it, everyone thought that this has to be some kind of Muslim extremist group, Al-Qaeda or something, who done it. Some experts pointed to Libya because we were very heavily involved in the bombing there at this time. And already at 7 o'clock p.m. We have an interview with a freelance reporter who had actually spoken to one of the survivors, who told him, and he told us and our viewers, that the perpetrator is a white Caucasian male, speaks fluently Norwegian, dressed up as a policeman, has a rifle and a handgun, or a pistol or a revolver. I saw that information on NRK too, at about the same time. Still, I'm not sure what went wrong. Maybe we didn't believe it. But actually, we did continue for a couple of hours more to speculate towards Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups. In a situation like this happens on our doorstep. We don't need to quote other media then. We did a couple of exceptions. We quoted the New York Times and the BBC, both totally wrong stories. Why would they know? As to identification of the perpetrator here, that's always an ethical dilemma, not in this case. I mean, this was very important to tell people his name and show people his picture, especially because he was born and bred in West Oslo in a nice neighborhood. He wasn't a Muslim, and we did this, of course, as fast as we could, just to prevent attacks or violence or whatever on people or groups of people in Norway, like especially the Muslim community. I could go on and on. I'll tell you one more thing that I think is important. That's the untold story, which is also an ethical dilemma. Why, or how could Anders Behring Breivik become so evil? I think that a key answer to that lies in his childhood and upbringing, and the mental health of his mother, and her mother again. This is a story that we know. I think most Norwegian news media knows this story. This is a story that we don't tell, as of yet at least, because it would be in violation of the privacy laws. It would be invading his mother's privacy, and she, after all, is not the criminal here. I think it's a very important story, and I think it's going to be told in some way. Because I think that Norwegians are still struggling to come to terms with this. And most Norwegians do not know this information about his childhood, which is pretty bad, actually. Other points, taking care of our staff. That's our ethical responsibility. We just sent them out into a bomb site. Often there's a bomb number 2. We didn't think of that. All our equipment, we didn't bring it. I mean, we go to war zones too. We have equipment, we have training. We just sent people out. And then there's the footage question, and I have just a short video that I want to show you that we have not published. We have a lot of footage that we have not published. If you can just show the second one, and I'll quickly just say why afterwards. Now, we have a lot of this footage that's never been aired on TV2. Those first pictures around the island is basically 69 youngsters lying dead, almost out in the water. The same kind of pictures that Paris Match published last week, stills, which led to an outcry in Norway, because you can buy the magazine Paris Match in Norway. And the reason it's so important is that every parent knows exactly where their child was killed and how he or she was killed, with how many shots, the cause of death and all that. Even I know the names of these people that I see here now. Now, would we have published it if this had happened in somewhere in Asia or Africa? Yes, we would. So it's a very big distinction there, and double standards in ethics, really. Anyway, stop there. Thank you for having me. And I know that we're gathered here from all over the world, but this is a Norwegian perspective. For us, this was, I still can't believe it when I see it now. So thank you.
Thanks very much indeed for that. I mean, and the enormous range of ethical decisions that have to be made. This picture or that picture, this interview or that interview, this person or that person. It seems to me that constantly every single editorial decision that's made has an ethical value to it. Are our people equipped to make those sorts of decisions? And it seems to me that particularly when we're in the competitive environment, particularly when we're competing with social media, where there are people putting up information who don't have any framework of values to work with. This is one of the most challenging things. Thanks for that. I mean, I think that's sort of a very sober way of introducing, I think, a discussion which is very often too much seen as some sort of set of academic reflections between people who like to see it as an intellectual exercise, when actually ethical journalism is always about flesh and blood. It's always about the reality of life and death. Now, I want to move on to some other aspects of it. Bob Satchwell, look, I was impressed actually with one of the things that Niklas talked about was respect and dignity. And the question of providing the report and so on. And I know that in Norway, there's been a considerable number of media that have produced reports about how they behave and how they behaved in the last year. And in fact, I've just received a copy of one of them. And that is a way in which media are making themselves accountable by actually talking to their audience and saying, this is what we've done and this is how we do it and these are the ethics that we're working to and so on. Now, in the United Kingdom, one has to say that whole question of respect and dignity and the role of media is very much on the spot. And there's just one other point. It just comes to me. The island of Utøya, where this terrible tragedy took place, was effectively declared out of bounds for a number of months, and the media kept away from it. The Norwegian media, and actually the foreign media as well, kept away from it. Only one journalist, one freelance journalist, broke that embargo, went onto the island, took pictures, and it was used in a British tabloid newspaper about, you know, this was the island of horrors and so on. And so there's a real question there about not just Leveson and not just the sort of particular issues, about how on earth do we get buy-in from media owners and media companies to do the right thing and to act decently, particularly in cases like this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It raises all of those issues. The first point which struck me, though, watching that film, is that journalists, and particularly photographers and cameramen, are unlike ordinary, sensible people who normally run away from danger. The biggest problem in terms of being a boss, actually, is trying to tell your own staff, don't run into danger. But that then leads you into a whole lot of other ethical questions. Those journalists, you could see them become involved. Not many people outside of our trade would ever believe that journalists have any heart or have any emotions, but we all do, actually, and we are affected by them. And there's this speed of what's going on, plus the fact that you get this incredibly unusual event. And while a lot of the time we spend talking about ethics is involved with, certainly what we've done with Leveson, the Leveson issue has been about politicians, how we deal with politicians, the relationship between the media and politicians, or the relationship between the media and the new aristocracy, in other words, celebrities. There is a much bigger problem about how we deal with ordinary people who find themselves in extraordinary circumstances, and that's what this was. That's where you really have to think about the issues. The thoughts which occur to me are that, okay, yes, you've got got to, sometimes, you think about the victims, the immediate victims, the families who've lost loved ones and so on, but you've also got to remember that a crime of that level, or a 9/11 or the 7/7 bombings in London, are crimes against the whole community as well, and the whole community needs to be given information. That's our job, is to give them that information, which is sometimes more important than the interests of the whole of the public override the interests of the individuals. You do, in the end, get into issues of privacy, maybe. You know, you talk about the criminal's mother. Well, you know, in the end, sometimes if we're going to get some kind of settlement in our own minds about this, you may have to go down that route. But the key thing for me about anything to do with ethics is that, I mean, first of all, I don't believe that journalists should be over-regulated, shouldn't really face any restrictions or laws other than those which all of us as citizens face. That's the Carl Bernstein, you know, Carl Bernstein of Watergate fame, his view, and it's an American view. I'm basically a First Amendment, American First Amendment fundamentalist. We shouldn't do that, but that's not to, we shouldn't face any extra restrictions. But that's not to say that we shouldn't, at times, restrict ourselves. And even in a situation like the one we've just seen, or in bombings, the terrible time that we had in the UK and Northern Ireland, journalists have got to do one very simple thing, and that is, however much the pressure's upon them, they've got to think twice. Am I invading someone's privacy? Yes. Am I entitled to because there's a bigger public interest? If yes, do it. In other times, am I, even it may come to, I'm about to break the law. Am I entitled to break the law? There may even be a case for that. And it's that thinking twice. That's what ethics is about. And you posed the question earlier at the start, Aidan, about you know, where this consideration of ethics comes. It's got to come from within us as journalists. Editors are the brand managers of their newspapers or TV stations. They are the ones we are the ones who've got to polish and maintain the credibility and the belief of our selected audience in our product. So we've got to set those standards, and we've got to be supported by the people who own and therefore are our bosses in doing that. And you're absolutely right. It has to come down from the top. There has to be a belief that comes down from the top, and we have to insist that our journalists do have high ethical standards. Let me finish on this simple point, that even though I am, as I say, a First Amendment fundamentalist and believe totally in the freedom of the media, believe that there should be very little regulation and that there's a bigger danger in over-regulation, what is very, very important, that even though we are free and should be free, there are times when we, in thinking twice, should say, yes, we're free to do it, but that just because we are free to do it doesn't mean to say always that we should do it.
Thanks very much indeed. I mean, you know, I mean, I think that those sentiments, I think we'd all agree with. But Ying Chang, I wonder if I can turn to you. I mean, agreeing with the sentiment is easy, is the easy stuff. I mean, how do you create structures, or how do you do something that puts it into effect? Now, particularly when you and your experience, you're working at Hong Kong University, you're also working in Beijing, you're very, very close understanding of the difficulties that journalists face, also when the government is a big player, when the state itself is actually on top of how journalism and free speech is practiced. I mean, so it's one problem that we have with owners and getting commitment from owners and so on, and there's another problem with the government as well. And then comes the difficulty about the media dealing with the changing nature of receiving information at breakneck pace. So how do you see these things can be properly dealt with?
The situation you mentioned, China. Situation in China is very different, obviously, from the United States, from the UK. But there are also the universalities, such as situation like this. You have disasters in China. You have children being killed because of natural disasters, because of, like in the earthquake. Earthquake is a natural disaster, but badly constructed schools that led to the collapse of schools and children died. How do you deal with the families? How do you deal with trauma, right? And these are universal issues that reporters need to deal with, right? And in China, you have a very, you can call it a very convoluted environment in that reporters and editors and the media, you have more market-oriented media, they are caught between the party line and the bottom line.
Yeah.
So you have the party line that you are only allowed to do certain things. There are stories that you're not supposed to do, right? If you follow the party line, right, you have to follow the party line. But on the other hand, you also need to make money, right? And that's the bottom line. So you're caught between, and that's the structural issues that I'm very glad you mentioned. Because yes, reporters need to observe ethics. We have our inner standards. I was a reporter in New York Daily News. I do go after, you know, quote, good murders, newsworthy murders, right? And I deal with that. But it's more than an individual ethics, right? And when you operate in a situation with unfair competition, with government oppression, so what do you do, right? So it means that the challenge you face in dealing with these situations, dealing with ethical issues, become even more critical and challenging. And so I would like to add that, so in talking about ethics in journalism, we cannot just talk about the individual or the media. There are two players that has to come into counting. One is the government, right? And the other one is the public. And often we know that doing stories like these, you need to protect the public, protect your interviewees from their best interests, right? You have people who may pour their heart out at you, right? And then sometimes you want to say, hey, wait a minute, you know. Maybe there's something you should not, right? You need to protect yourself. So that's the issue of media literacy comes in. Well, we in an information society, right? We're flooded with information. Everyone is a producer of news. Everyone is a consumer of news, right? And it means that the education on the learning of what's ethical journalism cannot and should not be limited to the profession itself, right? It needs to be engaged. The public needs to be engaged. If we have our way, maybe we want some kind of media education in the public schools. It could be a required course in the universities. So the public would learn how to use the media and how to protect themselves and to empower themselves with the media. So it's not just individual reporters being left to their own devices. Right? And that said, there's very good journalism that's going on in China. People push the envelope. And the more skilled you are, and the bolder you are in exposing wrongs. And then the final point I want to make is that because of the universality of these issues, it would be very useful, like such lessons, can be taken to China, right? Or the lessons that are learned in China can be taken out to outside, to the West and other places, because there's only one journalism, you know, telling facts, be truth, and there's a lot of lessons that we can learn to help each other.
Look, thank you very much indeed. I mean, I think just to highlight that, I think that's right. I think one of the things the Coalition for Ethical Journalism will really focus on is sharing experience, is sharing the understanding and experience and the knowledge that's gained in different regions and so on. And very often there's a prejudice that many of us have who seems to think that actually it is the First Amendment countries or it is Western Europe that actually are the guardians of truth in the best way to operate in these areas. But I think that around the world there are different experiences in different regions which are just as challenging and just as courageous and actually just as innovative and important to support. The problem is a lot of us don't know about it because we don't have the networks which provide the information. So I think the challenge that you put there is a very important one. Finally, Dean, I want to ask you about really the main thought, actually, that was behind this, this panel altogether. Look, all of us are dealing with, and we've heard a lot about in the last couple of days, about how we get information, how quickly we can get information, how we can distill it and put it out on all sorts of platforms and so on as quickly as possible, beat the opposition and so on, and very often. But the question is, how can you do that? If ethical journalism is thinking journalism, how do you produce information when you don't have time to think? When actually everybody is taking the information in and putting up a little breaking news strip as quickly as possible, and there are a certain number of seconds you have to sort of, you know, beat targets and so on. Isn't this where the bottom line and competitive urges have actually begun to corrode the sort of the fabric of ethical journalism? How do we challenge that?
It's a real issue, and when Bob mentioned the phrase "think twice," I think that also applies to the way we work with speed. I think mainstream media really risks squandering the most important asset they have when they rush to put out unverified information, and that's trust. So that's a short answer, but I'm going to give you a longer answer now. And I've made some notes through the conference here that I'm going to refer to. You know, as we talk about these issues, I think it's important to note that two important trends have been at work. Number one, I think the basic unit of journalism is rapidly changing from the individual article, whether it's a text story or a TV piece, to the social stream, which is a vast and swift and sometimes dangerous torrent of information and data that our audiences have access to, free access to, both as consumers and as producers. And we in the traditional media are no longer the gatekeepers of information. This is an era in which anyone with an idea and an internet connection can be a publisher. The other thing, the other trend I think that is happening that's important is that news organizations, as you say, have been engaged in this arms race of speed in which I really think there can be no winners, and which we risk losing the trust of our audiences. Increasingly, for breaking news, audiences are turning to social media, and especially Twitter, where information in the social stream is available with just breathtaking speed. And I can't remember the last time that I went to a news website to follow a breaking story. I go to Twitter, and then from there I take my cues and then I go to a website. So in this democratized publishing world, and at a time when news beats are measured in seconds or less, and in which Twitter is essentially becoming the new wire service, the people's wire, we have to ask ourselves, do breaking news scoops really matter on a story that everyone in the social stream is covering? I don't think that's what our audiences are looking to us for. Do we really want to risk our hard-earned credibility by reporting or retweeting unverified information? I mean, it is essential that news organizations be players in the social stream, but it's also essential that they develop social media guidelines for their journalists so they know how to swim in it. And each organization is going to have to decide just how restrictive or permissive that's going to be. Now, for mainstream news organizations, trust is the competitive differentiator. Surveys have shown, too, that that level of trust is declining. And we have to preserve that and rebuild it. I think Tom Kent of the AP put it well on the first day of the conference when he said that when we lose that trust, all we are just big companies trying to sell you something. And so news organizations have to be out there covering breaking news, but our responsibility is to get it right and to get to its essence, and not necessarily just to get it first. I think in the example that we saw from Norway, you were really getting to the essence of the story and resisted this urge to get out there with this unverified information that the person was from Libya or whatever. And the scoops, I think, that we should be striving for should be in context, insight, the why, the what now of the story, and very importantly, pulling together the rest of the social media stream. And, as Peter Bale put it yesterday, we can't get away anymore with just writing 600 words and saying, that's the analysis. So when we speak of breaking news, we should be speaking of breaking analysis, breaking explanation, breaking corrections to correct misleading information that's out there in the stream. And I think that's where journalists and news organizations can truly win and keep the trust of our audiences and our fellow swimmers in the social stream. We have to be the strong swimmers in the stream and places where people can go, where they know they can depend on finding real truth and the essence of the story.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think all of you actually, one way or another, have actually sort of placed created a checklist about the challenges that we face if we're going to talk about sort of ethical journalism in the future, and I think it's a pretty demanding checklist. But I think it's also important that a new organization like GEN is putting itself in the forefront of raising the question, of actually working out how we begin to develop that. Right, who'd like to ask any questions? We've got a few minutes, so I'm going to sort of take one, two, anyone else? Over there, that's another one, okay? We'll start. I'll take those three and then I'll come back to the panel. The microphone. It's not working, is it? Use this one while we sort it out.
Yeah, this is working. I have a question for Niklas. We saw that TV2 followed the social responsibility model. You sort of suppressed the news and you filtered it. Was it across the board for this incident, or were there any violations which you could tell us about from other press?
So you're asking whether or not other media followed the same standard that you applied?
Yes, is the short answer to that. I know that there were some reports out, maybe 20 dead. I mean, other figures than the police used. But in general, Norwegian news media waited for the official number, which was wrong anyway, but we waited for that. And in general, I'll also say that although there have been mishaps and we're not flawless and we don't want to come across as saints or anything, but I think that Norwegian news media has gained trust through our coverage of this atrocity and how we deal with the court, with the trial that's going on now.
I'm Justice Karju from India. I'm chairman of the Press Council of India, formerly judge of the Supreme Court of India. I'm going to say something which may make me very unpopular here, as it has made me in my own country. That is that you media people should not be given total freedom, because the profit motive has perverted a large portion of you. Let me tell you my experience of India. In India, there's massive poverty. It's a 1,200 million nation with 80% people living in horrible poverty on $50 a day with massive problems of unemployment, health care and so on. But 90% of coverage of media, particularly the broadcast media, is lives of film stars, which film star is having an affair, which film star has become pregnant, fashion parades, astrology, cricket, deliberately diverting attention of the people from the real issues which are economic to non-issues, to trivialities, and this is what largely this mischief is done by media deliberately. And this is not acceptable anymore. I have been saying that, see, they don't break the law. By showing lives of film stars, they're not, but the point is, it is unethical because in poor countries like India, the worst thing is poverty. And whatever perpetuates poverty is unethical. Whatever lifts the standard of living of people is ethical. So it's a plain and simple test, and I'm afraid much of the media is totally unethical, at least in India.
Thanks. And could we take the question at the back there? I mean, just to respond to that, I mean, look, it's absolutely right. There is an ethical question about whether or not media, and including new media, all media, are giving proper voice and coverage to the poorest people in society. It's a legitimate and absolutely legitimate question. Whether or not we should answer that question by seeking maybe to look for restrictive measures on the way media operate, well, one has to be very careful about that. I would suggest we would want to create a media system in which the people engaged in it want to be as inclusive as possible, and that the challenge of making sure we are reporting absolutely that section of the population who are the ones who suffer from social dislocation, the ones who are the worst off, is absolutely, I think, something that should be put on our agenda, and I agree with that. But yes,
I had a question about mainstream.
Sorry, hold on.
Pardon?
Sorry.
I understand where you're coming from, and of course everybody should be, all journalists should be looking to help everyone in society, and people at the bottom are in a sense the most important. You know, journalism is about comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable, remember, and that's what we should be doing. And the history certainly in the UK of popular papers doing things which have changed society has been dramatic, and it goes back even before we had really big popular newspapers. It goes back to Charles Dickens, you know, one of the greatest journalists of all. 200 years ago he was born, and look what he did.
Okay, thanks. Yes.
Yes, it was a question about the mainstream media and trust, and you said that basically by being dependable and checking everything, that even if you're not breaking news, you're keeping the trust or trying to keep the trust. What about when the mainstream media doesn't cover something or waits too long and it's obvious that the non-mainstream media and the internet is getting it right? What do you do in that situation? How would you talk about trust, I guess?
Well, I think, you know, that's you know, certainly an example of why social media have been a good thing. I think there are stories that would not have been covered had there not been social media. And so I think we in the mainstream media need to take a lesson from that. As I say, we are not the gatekeepers. I still think of myself as a card-carrying member of the mainstream media, even though I'm an independent consultant now, so excuse the use of the pronoun. But I think that, you know, we're not the gatekeepers of information, and when there is an important story that arises out of social media, I think one of the responsibilities of mainstream media is to cover that then and say, thank you very much.
Okay, one last short question here. Have we not got our microphone again? Here, okay, quickly.
Thanks. My question is to Niklas. You've mentioned that the footage that you showed us here, you would have broadcasted that if it was from somewhere abroad or somewhere far away. Have this experience changed your attitude of covering disasters from all over the world? So would you broadcast it now if it was from far away?
As I said, I don't want to come across as a saint, so yes, we would, basically. The reason we do not publish or air this now is that I think it's a violation of the parents to see a picture on national TV of their son or daughter and how he was shot and where he was shot. And that's why they reacted very strongly to the Paris match pictures last week. You buy that magazine in Norway, you open it, and there's a picture of your son. But I see that this is probably this is a double standard, and the world is connecting more and more, and we have a problem there, of course. But no one, I mean, we're not the BBC. We broadcast to Norwegian people in Norway. They don't know people in Japan.
Okay. Look, I'm going to have to cut it there. I want to thank you all very much indeed, and this session I really enjoyed, because not only are these people talented, they've raised issues which are incredibly important for all of us. So I hope you'll all be involved in sort of following up the work of the coalition with Jen, and we'll certainly be in touch with you afterwards. I want to thank the panel. Thank you very much indeed.